Hey folks, welcome back to another episode of JavaScript Jabber. This week on our panel, I guess it's just me, Charles Max Wood. We have two special guests. We have Tolly. Now you've been on before. You want to remind people who you are?
Sure. So I'm a front-end engineer. I think I might have done two episodes. One of them was about developer happiness, and the other was about Pickle.js, which is an integration testing library that I wrote.
Awesome. We also have Jeff. Jeff, do you want to introduce yourself? I don't know if you've been on before.
No, I haven't been on. I'm actually a back-end engineer in SRE. This will be my first time here. So.
Okay. Now, are you a back-end engineer or SRE on like Node stuff, or?
Not recently.
Okay.
Years back, I've done some Node, but yeah, just more of it's been like Python and Go lately. So.
Fun stuff. We also had Steve Edwards join us, so welcome, Steve.
How you doing?
All right, well, we're gonna get rolling.
Okay, good.
Yeah, we're live.
Woohoo! No Memorex, we're live, baby.
That's right. So really quickly, we brought you guys on to talk about the LeetCode meetup that you guys do. I guess it's in New York City. And I was looking at the website, and it says that this. So I guess we should probably start with what it is. But I want to get the story because it looks like you posted a post that kind of got things started.
Yeah. So somewhere around March, I got fired from Dropbox. And I started looking for jobs. And unlike all these prior years, I've been a software engineer for about 13 years. Front-end engineers never really had to do LeetCode. We just had a little take-home exercise or, my code a React component. And I started applying for jobs, and all of a sudden, there's just all of these LeetCode questions. So I went on a few interviews, just completely bombed them. And I started studying for LeetCode at that point, and it was just so arduous, so boring. I was making no progress whatsoever. So I went on this tech forum called Blind, which is basically where big tech people hang out. And I posted like, hey, I'm looking for some LeetCode buddies in New York City. And I had some pretty overwhelming response, over 100 comments to that post saying like, hey, I'm interested. And from that, I just started a Discord group to get everybody organized. And we had our first meetup, which was probably about 30 people.
Cool. So I have to admit, I'm kind of in the same boat that you were talking about, not necessarily seeing LeetCode questions come up, but I've never done anything in it. So what is LeetCode?
Yeah, so basically it's algorithm data science questions, something that you would learn in computer science in college. And for the most part, it doesn't really come up in most engineers' lives on their day-to-day job. Certainly not of front-end engineers. But why do companies ask these kinds of questions? Because they do, and at first I just didn't really get it. Like it seemed, lazy and counterintuitive. But then I started to understand why. Ultimately, they receive hundreds of applications for each position, and they need some way to filter those candidates because they all, come from good companies. They can say whatever they want on their resume. But ultimately, what LeetCode does is it gives a somewhat quantitative measure of can you at least use logic to solve a problem. And as I started doing more LeetCode, I started seeing like, okay, I could see how it links back to general problem solving ability, communication skills, etc. I still don't like it, but I could see why it's useful.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, I've done where I'm at in my company. I've been in charge of doing some hiring a number of developers, and we it's sort of a two-edged sword, and as in that, as a developer, as an applicant, I hate them. I hate them. They've cost me jobs before, and unfortunately, in the case, it was my issue was that it was so different doing it the way you do it during an application process during an interview versus how you would do it in real life. So for instance, if I'm programming Vue or Laravel, some of the other tools, I've got my IDE, I've got a debugger set up, I've got, all my tools that I can use to help me work through a problem. Where if I'm doing a test online, in this case, it was like a task pad type of thing where somebody's sitting there watching me and I'm coding. I have no debugger. I've got nothing to help me that I don't normally have. And it's like, how is this applicable? But at the same time, coming at it from the other side, we use a different platform. We didn't use LeetCode. My boss had looked at LeetCode and we had gone with another one where we come up with our own test and they have a pool of questions and we can assign them. And we would use that. And we have a minimum score, that they had to have, nothing really high, but it would filter out a decent amount of people. And then the ones that we'd hired did really well on it. So there's pros and cons. I guess it just depends on what side of the equation you're on when you're having to use this. I don't think you can certainly get people who could pass the test and then don't do well. One thing we ran into, this was so funny, was one of the things that the platform that we used, I think it's Test Dome, tells you how long it took him to pass the test. And we looked at one guy and it was like, 30 seconds. We're like, okay. So we start hunting around and sure enough, you can find GIFs on GitHub with the answers to tests to this particular question from this particular platform. And so it's literally copy and paste. Now, if I was to do that, I would still type it in manually to take up the appropriate amount of time instead of just copy paste. But this guy decided to, just copy paste and got it that way. So anyway, sorry, my 2 cents there on what you were just talking about.
Yeah. Before you respond to what Steve's talking about, Jeff, how did you get involved in all this?
Yeah. I maybe as a backend dev, I have done LeetCode problems earlier on in my career, but for interviews, but I do feel like it's shifted a little bit too, where, originally you could kind of see, okay, if you had sort of undergraduate level algorithms and data structures, you kind of just needed to know that stuff. And it was like a gate for that. But because there's more and more applicants and there's more and more of a need to filter, they've just constrained the time that you have, and you have to sort of do slightly more convoluted problems. It's still the same data structures, but more convoluted, less time. And so it's just become this very time constrained performance you have to do, where you really have to be fast. And actually, to your point, like I feel like you actually have to code a little differently, because there really isn't time in like an hour, in some cases, 20 minutes, you have to solve some of these. And so like, you really have to, you can't afford to need to debug your code, really. You have to be able to just have your answer be mostly right the first time you write it, which is so different from the normal process of how it would actually work, where you rewrite it, or you write an initial version, you kind of think through it. Oftentimes the first version I write of something is just like a rough draft, and like I'll rewrite it. That's like part of the process. But I feel like in some of these interviews, you have to approach it differently, because there isn't time for you to fit in a rewrite in the middle of it. So it's just a very different approach to just coding in general, I feel like. And I don't know, I guess I kind of take the perspective of like, well, I'm going to have to do these. It's like every field has their arbitrary gatekeeping that they do. If you're like a doctor, or there's like almost hazing that people have to put up with to like enter that field.
Hazing. That's
our own form of hazing sort of arise as like they've just made these problems like arbitrarily more difficult, because they just need to filter people, basically. So
So Jeff, I'm curious, did you see I'm gonna kind of ask it a different way. So did you see Tolly's post? Is that how you got involved in the group?
Yeah, or so I'm somewhat new to New York. I moved here in January, and I was kind of I was both sort of looking for starting to, have my eyes up for new work out here, and then also just wanted to meet people. So I went on meetup.com, and Totally had kind of put it on all the platforms. And so that was the way I got in, is saw it on Meetup and then started attending, and met a bunch of like very, people who were willing to grind, I guess, like willing to just like come in and just come in every week, do the work, which is like, I agree. It's sort of not fun work, but it's like, I realize like I'm going to get more and more of these as time goes on. So
yeah,
I got to get good at it. So yeah, it's been
so yeah. So going back to the original discussion, I don't know. I've been given all kinds of sample problems, for interviews, and some of them are helpful and some of them are not. But yeah, it sounds like the platform is a little bit hard to work with, because I've always just been able to do it in my own IDE.
I guess there's like a few things that are hard to work with, not just missing an IDE, but the whole code style. You don't get to use a debugger. You don't get to use a lot of the tools that you usually have out there. You don't really get the whole TypeScript support in most of these platforms. So, you don't know the data structure without manually having to analyze what's going on. The time constraint, it's not doing you any favors. It's rated for speed, not for readability, which I think is my main problem with this kind of style of coding. Usually as an engineer, I want to make sure that everybody is going to understand my work. So I'm going to use very descriptive variable names. I'm going to split it up into different functions, probably different files, but that's just not really a luxury that you get in LeetCode. People use like one letter variable names, and there's the whole like code golf where you try to write everything on one line. Like all sorts of different like hacks and cheats to get like a few milliseconds. It's just solving a very different kind of problem than I'm used to.
Well, one thing that I've noticed before, and you hear this joke, I hear it on, whether it's Syntax FM or any other podcast. Some people will say, Twitch streaming is sort of a popular thing, where coders will get on and live stream and other people can watch them. And I heard one guy say, yeah, the reason I don't do that is they might see that 75% of the time I'm Googling, how do I do this in PHP, or how do I do this in JavaScript,
just like everybody else,
I start coming up with little shortcuts from my, forget my little online tool here, and like Alfred, that, look up this in PHP real quick, or, look at this. I'm not always typing everything. It just because that's how you remember stuff, is how you look up stuff. You got to look for it half the time instead of just being able to do it from memory right away.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like one of the biggest complaints about it is it becomes less and less about like creative problem solving, or like like diffuse mode thinking, where your brain's in more of the diffuse mode where you're accessing different parts of your brain. Like you really have to turn your coding into like a fast twitch thinking, like kind of focus mode, where you're not doing as much creative problem solving as much as just executing on known patterns, and you have to like know the patterns, memorize the patterns, and then just rip them out real fast without making mistakes. And it kind of, it sort of is a different. I feel like the interviews are searching for different qualities in people because of that. It's like much more about, I don't know, being like a code soldier, that just sort of executes on the patterns that are in front of you, versus like a creative problem solver. But yeah, and especially is like I have ADHD too, so it's like that's not the kind of things that I naturally excel at. So I feel like I have to put in more time than a normal person would in those types of interviews. But
yeah, what it reminds me of is the discussion about standardized testing in schools, where you get to the point where the standardized test scores are so important for, getting money for schools or whatever, that pretty soon teachers are teaching for the test instead of the content, and teaching how to creatively think, how to problem solve. Instead of teaching, okay, the test is looking for this, so we're going to teach you everything so that you can pass this test. Okay, great. You get past the test. What has that done for you? You know how to pass that test, but has it taught you anything really useful outside of that? But
yeah,
I'm kind of curious. Does your group do some of that, where it's more strategies to pass the LeetCodes as opposed to, specific, I don't know, algorithms or something?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, we'll like for specific types of problems, but it's like strategies to move quickly within an.
That's what I mean.
So yeah, it's
you're
like
teaching to the test, so to speak, a little bit.
Right. And so it's like, okay, so, the types of problems where you have like a 2D matrix and you need to do breadth first search on cells in the matrix or something, then like, there's like little, like a generator, like a lot of us have taken to just writing this little generator function that just checks to see if the neighbors are on the edge or not. And then like, that's the pattern we use every time we do that now, is just this little, and it's just like, it is useful to kind of learn those little sub-coding patterns to like be able to like rip those answers out really fast. But yeah, it's like little micro strategies to avoid getting tripped up in the implementation during an interview, and just being able to like bang out like code, like basically have mentally saved code snippets of things that you can just bang out. Honestly, yeah, it would be nice to have those saved in an editor where you could just like put the snippet in. But yeah, I mean,
I've got to say though, as much as I want to take that moral high ground of, well, this has nothing to do with our jobs, I am starting to get a bit more appreciation. So I actually interviewed for a few jobs, and I failed on the practical coding skills, which, well, no excuse there really. And the reason being, the last 2 years, I actually probably coded 30% of the time, and what I coded was POCs. And the rest of the time, I was basically project management, architecture. And I completely forgot, like, how do you code a basic component in React? Like that is something I should know. And then I started, working on my own like little app just for fun. And I realized like, like I really should know these different patterns, but like I don't. And I start like going through, and it feels very much like LeetCode, where, okay, I kind of see like these common patterns. Like when I'm dealing with inputs, this is generally the code that I would use. If I'm trying to like pass in filters, how do I pass in filters? How do I pass them back? It's like a pretty common problem, but you kind of have to think through it a little bit the first time, and then you know the pattern. So is it exactly the same kind of problems that I'll be solving? No, but believe it or not, I think the strategies sort of started helping me in the part of coding, which I do value for my job.
Yeah, just more proof of the adage, use it or lose it, right?
Yep. So I'm a little curious then, since this was focused on, I guess, mastering LeetCode so you could get a job. Did it help you get a job?
Not yet. I actually took a break from LeetCode and job searching for about, I want to say 2 months, probably. Something like that. And yeah, a lot of it, I realized I have some savings, and right now it's just not a great market for engineers.
That's true.
My biggest problem at work has always been, lack of a personal life, lack of community. Like all my self-worth was pretty much invested in my job. And that caused a whole bunch of different problems. So I basically decided to take a few months to like build up, some community, build up some friends, some hobbies. And now I'm like sort of passively searching. Like I've got an interview with Uber, Airbnb, and Stripe coming up.
You like the small companies, huh? The mom and pop shops?
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, like I think at this point, I'm more in passive search mode because I rather, have that really stable personal base for when I go back to work. And I think a lot of that blind culture is like you have to have a job now, you have to maximize your TC, and that's not necessarily the only path.
Your TC?
Oh, TC. So blind. How would you describe blind, Jeff?
Yeah, in my opinion, blind's kind of a toxic environment, but TC just means total compensation, and it's very like a lot of the people on blind are all big tech workers. I mean, that's sort of the intention of it. Is it's like you get the inside scoop on some of these companies, I guess, as people anonymously join blind and then talk about the company. But it's sort of become this culture of like everyone's obsessed with the FANG income, and basically it's I don't know if I always feel like blind is the healthiest place to go on, because it's a little bit of like I'm sure there's like, you never really know how many people are lying about what their TC is or what they're doing. But yeah, it's a pretty like just compensation obsessed, getting the highest paying job no matter what kind of thing. But and then also just like very negative about the industry in general. So it's a very like kind of nihilistic kind of culture.
No, Foley's just nodding.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's like everything sucks. Money is the only thing that matters. But I don't know. I mean, like it still is useful in some ways to like just get some of that insider information a little bit if you're willing to wade through kind of the toxicity that is common with all of social media at this point. But
right.
But yeah. So, and like I think like that is sort of, there is a little bit of an aspect of that with like LeetCode is associated most with like the FANG or like the big company type interviews. Okay. And so there is always going to be like a portion of the population of people who are interested in grinding LeetCode that are a little bit more just the sort of TC monsters or whatever. But I don't know. I feel like, emotionally it's hard to like sustain that attitude about life. So like, I feel like for me, and I think for Totally as well, it's like you eventually want it to become like a game, or that you start to get good. Like it's like a workout or something. You start to like value the improvement or the progress that you're making. And like, it's sort of a game that you're getting better at, like a crosswords or something, right? Or doing Wordle. And I don't know. I try to cultivate that attitude about it a little bit because it is a grind. But I think like Totally said, I'm starting to sort of enjoy the problems a little bit, like spend a little bit of time each day where I sit down with a fresh cup of coffee in the morning and just like work on one of the problems. And you try and be forgiving of yourself if you aren't getting that one right then. And just try to be organized. If you realize you're struggling with something, like write down what it is, so you can kind of start to identify patterns and like what you're good at, what you're not good at. Like I'm a big fan of deliberate practice, that whole concept. You just like break down all the components of your implementation and your like algorithm, your problem solving like steps, and then just start to identify like where you're strong, where you're weak, and then drill on the things where you're weak. And I don't know, like in a way, it's like I can recognize it's all sort of BS, but in another way, I'm sort of enjoying the progress that I'm making. So it's not like I'm not totally nihilistic about it, I guess. So.
Yeah, actually, funny thing.
What is TC Monster? I missed that.
Like just somebody who it's like just being obsessed with compensation and nothing else.
TC is total compensation, AJ.
Yeah.
Because once you get to the like certain in FANG, like they compensate more and more in terms of stock. So like they always talk in terms of TC versus just salary. Because like as you get to FANG, it'll be like more than half of your comp will start to come from like stock and stuff. So
interesting.
Yeah.
What were you going to say, Toli?
Yeah, so interesting thing happened. I took a break from LeetCode for about 2 months. And after that, I went back to a LeetCode problem and it became so much easier. And I noticed that I didn't really have that whole stressful mindset when approaching the problem. It was more like, all right, if I solve it, great. If I don't solve it, whatever. And like once all those like voices just started moving away, it really is about problem solving. You just kind of lay out a plan and you follow that plan versus I think that Blind does have that sort of hectic culture of like, I've got to solve these problems. It has to happen right now. If I'm unemployed for one more month, it's going to be terrible. So I think, even for people in big tech on Blind, it would be really useful to step away from that kind of culture for a bit and then come back.
I kind of have two directions I want to go. I guess since we're still talking about LeetCode, let's do this one first. And it is effectively like, what strategies are there? So let's say somebody's listening to this and they're going, okay, you've talked about this LeetCode meetup and how these guys got together, but how do I solve the LeetCodes, right? How do I get better at them?
I can speak a little bit to it, I guess. I mean, I think like one thing that's important is like, even if you're familiar with algorithms or data structures, maybe you have like a CS degree or something. That doesn't mean you're familiar with like all the intricacies of the different ways to implement that algorithm. So like binary search, for instance, there's like, I think a lot of people are comfortable with binary search, maybe even to the point of being like, oh, this is really basic. Like I shouldn't have to drill on this. Mm-hmm. But it's different to implement binary search, for instance, if you're looking for a specific element in an array versus you're looking for a boundary point between like where you would insert an element that doesn't yet exist in an array. And there's like slightly different
interesting. Okay.
Ways to do that. And like, depending on some of the more complicated LeetCode problems may involve something where you're looking for a position in a sorted array that isn't an element, but you need to like find that position and then do something. Or another one is where you need to search for an element. And they both have slightly different ways that you implement the while loop. And like they both start with like a left pointer and a right pointer. And one of them may be like less than or equal to, where you wait until they're basically overlapping. And the other one, it will be less than or something, right? So there's slightly different implementations depending on which flavor of binary search you're trying to do. And I think like the process of trying to get good at it is sort of identifying like, oh, okay, so this is probably going to be this type of algorithm, but then there's like 4 different ways to implement it, and I should drill on all of those. So that way, like, you're not getting tripped up in that part of the implementation as you're trying to bang out the algorithm. That may be like that and then a few other steps or something. Or like another example is like, I was actually just sort of realizing I needed to work on this the other day. It was like, I've done a lot of breadth first search or depth first search problems, but not a lot of like multi-source breadth first search or depth first search, where you don't just start from one point and then search outwards, but you put like several points in there at once, and then you look at like layers, and then that could like, so just as an example, if you, well, I don't know if we want to dive into a whole problem, I guess, but like there's different, like there's little implementation flavorings of every algorithm. And just like being patient with yourself, like trying some problems, and then you're inevitably not going to get all of them, but like try and rack your brain to get something working. And then after a while, once you realize you're not making any progress, like check the editorial. I really recommend paying for LeetCode Pro so you can see their editorials, because they do a really good job of breaking down how to solve the problem. And then kind of identify like, oh, okay, so like I was able to identify that, yeah, breadth first search was the right algorithm here, but I got tripped up in this part of the implementation. And then just try to like, I keep a lot of notes off to the side of like this type of problem, like so I've started like taking notes a bunch about like multi-source BFS, and I put that off to the side and like put some of the problems that were related in the related section. and then have those stored off to the side so I can drill them. And it's a lot of like, yeah, I just like understanding the little nuances and then just sticking with it. And I honestly think that's like one of the best benefits of the group is that like it's a grind, and it's like it's better to like suffer with other people, I guess.
Miseryless company.
Right. It's like it becomes like a little bit of a social outlet. It's not so isolating, and like we kind of are going through it together and teaching each other and that kind of thing. So it becomes a lot less like this like despair of all this work that you have to do and how hard it is and all of that, and more about like us helping each other. So
yeah, at risk at sounding like the stereotype that everybody says about CrossFitters. That's part of the reason I love CrossFit, is that you're sharing the misery with other people, and it makes it a heck of a lot better than when you're just in there, working out by yourself in a home gym or doing your own workout at a standard gym. It just makes it so much more enjoyable, and who knows, you're going to learn from other people as well.
Yeah, totally.
You see them walking in like they're busted the same way you're busted.
Oh yeah. Oh, there's so many good memes on Instagram about like that CrossFit is so funny.
So I got another question, and that is more along the lines of the meetup. So it's so funny because COVID totally screwed up meetups.
Oh,
and I mean, there used to be a whole bunch of tech meetups here in Utah. I think there are a couple that have kind of come back. And by come back, I mean they're running. I don't know how many people are going.
Yeah, it's like 1/3 the attendance at most of them, if that.
Right. So my question is, so let's say that I want to start a meetup, not necessarily even a LeetCode meetup, but let's say that I'm thinking, okay, it'd be really great. There's all this new stuff coming down with AI, or with, maybe it is LeetCode, or maybe it's just, hey, look, I want to be better at JavaScript or better at React, or, you name it. What do you recommend for people who want to get something like that started?
I think a lot of it is there has to be a real need. The reason why LeetCode worked was it kind of needed to get a job. And we were targeting people who really wanted jobs. So I think if you find that, then it's relatively straightforward. But yeah, like I think the second one, I also started another kind of community. And a lot of that has to do with identity. Like, how do you identify yourself as? If you can link to identity, that does a lot.
Right. Now, is that partially just, hey, I do React, or hey, I do Vue, or I want to do better JavaScript, or is there more identity than that you want to dive into?
Well, for the other community I sort of started, it has absolutely nothing to do with computers, but
right.
Well, let's say part of it is something about like, how do I communicate with the world? How am I honest with myself? So if you start seeing yourself as a certain type of person, when you say I am blank, then it's much easier to form a community of people around you that are dedicated to that cause. And I think that does happen in LeetCode because people identify as like, I am someone who works in big tech. I am someone who gets jobs via LeetCode. So it works. Ultimately, the more close you are to somebody's identity, the better.
Gotcha.
I haven't delved into LeetCode just yet. Although, side note, I was just talking to a buddy of mine that's a DevRel at Amazon, and he was telling me about their process and LeetCode, and he was like, yeah, you probably want to go study up and get like the premium membership and do everything you can for 3 or 4 weeks before you even try. How does it work from a language standpoint? Do you get to choose the languages that you're using to answer these questions? Is it like, like if you primarily Vue or, one of the JavaScript frameworks, is it like vanilla JavaScript? Do you get to do stuff in Vue? Or if you're a backend guy like PHP or Java or Node or Ruby, do you get to use the language of your choice for answering questions? Or how does that work?
You do. I would say like LeetCode kind of started out as like mostly Java and Python, but since then they've really put a lot of effort into expanding. So most of the editorials now are in a bunch of different languages. I think they have C++ and Java and Python, and they usually have JavaScript. The editor, you can do a lot of different languages, like TypeScript if you want to do that. You can do JavaScript. They're actually, maybe I'll hop over and fire it up really quick and just confirm. But yeah, there's a bunch of different languages that they support, and like most of the editorials have a bunch of languages as well. But every once in a while, you may see a problem that like in the actual examples of how it's solved in the editorials, like it'll only be 2 languages or something. But we've had a number of people that have attended the group that are coming from coding boot camps. That's actually the 2 places where we meet up is at one of 2 different coding boot camps. And a lot of those folks have JavaScript as their main language. So like I think JavaScript works just fine. I think like Python is what I would recommend if people are sort of agnostic to language, just because it gives you, again, in terms of speed, Python has a lot of these little helper functions that just like you take a list and then you call sorted on it and now it's sorted, or like you call max on it and you get the maximum element. And it's just like, you just like throw that function on there and then just keep going. And there's a lot less stuff that you have to implement yourself. But yes, you can do any language for the most part. And actually I have the editor open. Okay, so they have C++, Java, Python, Python 3, so Python 2, Python 3, C, C#, JavaScript, TypeScript, PHP, Swift, Kotlin, Dart, Go, Ruby, Scala, Rust, Racket, Erlang, and Elixir.
Is that all? I'm kidding.
That's everything. That's what the editor supports. But yeah, like, so yeah, and I think if you're thinking JavaScript, I think that is going to have like I would say it's like a first class citizen at this point of LeetCode. So like a lot of the editorials have JavaScript implementations. So, and it looks like TypeScript as well. So,
but why is it called an editorial rather than a tutorial?
I was just going to ask the same thing.
I guess
editorial sounds like newspaper.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
I guess like they have there's like a solutions section, but that I think was what they first implemented, and that's just like community solutions. And then the editorial is like a professionally done breakdown that like really describes the whole algorithm with diagrams and, you know, even like maybe a little bit of video or something. So like the solutions, I think, I'm guessing it's like a legacy thing. It's like they called the solutions was the name they gave the community solutions, I guess.
So maybe they were looking at the community stuff and like pulling out and saying, okay, from all of what people are saying, as an editor of this content, these are the important pieces for people who are commonly missed concepts or whatever.
That would make sense. Yeah. I guess I don't know for sure that was their thought process, but that would make sense.
I personally don't find the editorials that useful. Whenever I want to understand something, I go to YouTube, I type the problem, and there's much, much better visual explanations.
Oh, so people are doing videos on specific LeetCode questions and how to answer them and solve them? Okay.
Also, there's a guy called LeetCode, who I think is one of the top YouTubers, but he has a course essentially explaining all these concepts in visual ways. And they all do a much better job than the editorials, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. I also think like LeetCode is if you're either new to algorithms and data structures, or you're just kind of rusty, start with LeetCode. That's another like paid thing though. But it's like $100 for a year. And then you go through their like his intro to algorithms, and it like gives a bunch of tutorials and then links to specific LeetCode problems that are for those topics. And I think that is one of the better sort of on-ramps into sort of LeetCode. And that's spelled NEET code.io. I guess we're basically advertising for them at this point. but yeah, I mean, I do think like we've had a couple of people that come into the sessions that are, pretty new. And we always recommend or I always recommend LeetCode as like, hey, this is how you kind of on-ramp.
So Toli, you had mentioned a little earlier about how you did this for a while and then you went away and then you came back and it's like, oh, now I can understand it, which is so true. I mean, I can't count the number of times I've solved a problem in my head in the shower, because I'm sitting there thinking about it or having a nightmare. Oh yeah, that's how I should do it.
Yeah. I get really stuck. I go for a walk. The same.
Yeah, exactly. My question is, we were talking earlier about how this can sort of be like studying for the test instead of studying the material. I'm curious to see that after having studied for LeetCode and gone through this and studying these problems, what areas you felt it improved for you, if any. I mean, does it help you with just general problem solving, with maybe some, programming type problem solving? What is it that, if anything, that you feel you can do better having gone through and studied for LeetCode?
Well, when I first started, I had so much emotional attachment, for lack of a better word, to LeetCode. On one hand, it was, I really hate doing this. This is so boring. This is so useless. I don't want to do this. Like, I can't do this. Like, I'm not the type of person who can do this. I'm a JavaScript engineer. I'm not like a algorithms person. Just a whole laundry list of why I don't want to and can't do LeetCode. After starting the meetup, it eased up a little bit. I started improving and seeing like, all right, so if I practice this, I could get better. I actually passed some first rounds of interviews, which I did not think I would pass. Like in Meta, I passed like 2 out of 3 algorithm interviews, which I was very surprised at. And then like taking that big break, it probably did, I wouldn't say the most good, but it did a huge chunk of good for me because it removed a lot of that I have to solve this or my life is sorry. Like that.
We are a family-friendly podcast.
Yeah. So basically that's what it did for me. And also just where I traveled, I went to Europe for a little while, and a lot of people who I met there were nomads. So all they did was essentially travel the world, and they went to different acro yoga conventions. And a lot of people there, they earned like maybe $10,000-$15,000 a year. And they were just having this much more fulfilling lifestyle. And then you have people on Blind, making 500, 700K a year, and they're suicidal. They don't have relationships. So having that huge juxtaposition of these two different lifestyles, it really helped me let go of a lot of the emotional baggage around LeetCode. And then it's like, this is just like any other problem. Like, it's not special. It removed that special factor from it.
So it sounded like it wasn't emotional attachment you had. It was more like emotional repulsion.
Yeah.
I really don't want to do this.
Exactly.
So how does that, going back to your meetups, so what do you do at the meetups? I mean, is it like, do you have like a shared screen where somebody can share their screen and everybody can look at a problem and sort of work through how to do it? Do you just pair up and look at laptops? Is there any sort of structure like, okay, how you doing? We're going to talk about this and this, where you go through problems as a group? Does it vary? I'm just curious to see how that works.
It does vary. I would say it varies a little bit based on how many people show up to a specific one. So like we had one like 2 weeks ago on Thursday at General Assembly, and that one was very large. So there was like 60 people there. So we really had to break it up into smaller groups. And in that case, we broke it up by just like level in LeetCode, like easy, medium, hard. And then there was like a system design group in that case. I think we may actually start to incorporate, like for the really large groups, start to incorporate like a pre-easy group as well, because there's a few people who are just onboarding onto LeetCode, and we want to include those people. I think when there's smaller groups, like some of our Saturday sessions, we I guess the pattern that we've fallen into that we sort of like is that we pick a solution type. It's like sliding window, where you like slide a window across an array to compute something, and sort of will make a theme for the whole session around identifying problems of that solution type and then solving a number of them to sort of get familiar with that type of solution. That I think helps a lot with just sort of like taking one type of solution and kind of embedding it in your mind, so it becomes like a tool, like a tool in your toolkit that you can pull out if you see another type of problem that uses that. And that's and I think if you're starting to get into LeetCode too, like I think the thing that can make it a lot less intimidating is realizing that there's only only 25 total types of solutions really for all LeetCode problems, more or less. And they're all like every LeetCode problem is like a different variation on a solution type, or maybe combines two of them together or something. But there's only like 25 patterns, and then you just have to kind of like drill them all. And there's like different flavors of a given pattern, like binary search is a pattern, but there's different flavors of it.
So this actually brings up something that I've been thinking about a lot lately, especially with this explosion of AI. It seems like we're wasting billions of dollars on these, general problem solving word games, when really, because I was thinking it'd be more in the order of 10,000, like maybe less than that, but somewhere in the order of 10,000 things you do as a programmer. Like think of every for loop you've ever written, think of every set of if statements you've ever done, think of every algorithm that you'd ever have had to use, which is probably less than 25, outside of LeetCode. Like think of all those things. If you just had some sort of assistant that could help identify like, this is the pattern here, let me template this out, how much more valuable would that be than having some generic thing that's just trying to like guess and figure stuff out from, context clues and statistical analysis? And how much less expensive it would be in processing power.
Yeah, are you talking about like designing an AI like as a design for a coding assistant, or
yeah, because the whole idea of most of this stuff seems to be based on OpenAI's work, whether it's OpenAI or not, like the LLM technology that they made public before they went back to being a private company, or not went back, but became a private company. Like that vein of technology is so good for what it was designed for, like creating ads, right? Like you want to put lots of ads on web pages with lots of keywords without, that is the business model that OpenAI had for like the last 10 years until, 2 years ago, they started doing code and stuff. But, so it's like they took a really, really general, like word-driven approach and then applied it to programming, and it does amazingly well. Like I actually am now a paid subscriber for GPT-4o, because with 4o, it's good enough that it's like gone from solving the problems I ask it like, a quarter of the time to 75% of the time. And some of that is I only ask it questions in a certain way now, but 4o is definitely better than 3, when this thing started. But I just think so often, if it could just template out, like, what are the things that you do as a programmer? Because there's not that many things that you really do. You do, like you're saying, I think it's more than 25 different patterns, but, it's a countable number of patterns that you use as a programmer. What if you just created an AI that did those things and then templated them out, rather than what, the statistical analysis bit? That's kind of the thought experiment.
I think ChatGPT already can do a lot of that. I mean, I use ChatGPT for all my coding now. yeah, basically I describe the problem that I'm trying to solve, and it spits out a good like 150 lines of code. Anything past that, that's where it starts having problems. It can't understand the context of my whole app. But if I say like this is something very specific that I want this module to do, it does an incredible job. And there are many like little things that it's great at as well, like create a type map for what I'm trying to do. Like that's just something that takes a long time to do by hand, but
Yeah.
It'll get it like 99% of the time.
I definitely don't see 99%, but it's with 4.0, I think that it's above 50%.
For just like a bunch of JSON, like say I drop in a bunch of JSON and it has like some text in it, I've basically never had it guess incorrectly. And I might have to change it around, like maybe like for this property, instead of a string, it's this array of strings. But that's really the only time that it gets it wrong. And you can't expect it to get it right there.
I was asking about how the meetup runs. And I think somebody mentioned that you guys do it at General Assembly in New York. So how do you find the space for your meetup? Somebody work there or?
So that was actually, Ken's not here, but Ken and Steven have been putting a lot of work into just reaching out to different coding boot camps. And those have been the most successful. So there's one called Fractal. They're in like Williamsburg, Brooklyn. And then there's General Assembly, which is more in Midtown, Manhattan. And the General Assembly is more new. Fractal, we meet on Saturdays, and General Assembly is like every other Thursday now, or it's going to be. But yeah, I mean, there have been a number of different attempts to reach out. I think in the early stages, Tolly was actually covering the cost of like trying to pay for these paid venues, and that wasn't super sustainable because we just have fluctuating numbers of people attending, and like it was also optional to pay for tickets. So at that time, a lot of people opted not to, and it wasn't really sustainable to do the paid venues. But yeah, we've found that the coding boot camps are definitely happy to have us there because it's like an interview prep group, which is sort of directly related to the value they're trying to provide their students. So that's gone well so far. We basically just get to use their space. For Fractal, we just get to kind of show up on Saturdays and use their space, and then for GA, they have to like organize an event around it. Because that's sort of their policy. But yeah, we're still kind of exploring a bit. I think Fractal's like further out. It's a less central location, so not as many people can attend that one. But yeah, we're looking for a space that's going to be kind of central for people that is hopefully not expensive. So
right. Speaking of space, do you ever use MySpace? I'm kidding.
No.
I just saw an article about MySpace celebrating its 21st anniversary, so I brought that to mind. I'll give myself a rim shot for that.
Wait, I'm going to go to the website. I didn't know they were still around.
Yeah, here's an article. I'll mention it in pics. Something I just saw in Hacker News. So anyway,
cool. Is there anything else we want to
shoot? Dog, it does exist.
Anything else we want to go into with the meetup or LeetCode before we do picks? Okay. Well, let's do the picks then. We usually have our guests go last, but Jeff, if you've got to jump off soon, are you enjoying any TV shows, books, movies, technology, anything else?
I don't know. This is not super exciting.
Anything.
Started playing Cyberpunk again, but that's an older game, I guess. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, just I have nothing that's super exciting. It's like I've just played Cyberpunk and Baldur's Gate 3, and then I do bar trivia when I'm not working and looking for work. It's hard to come up with these on the spot. You gotta come back to me, and I'll maybe have something.
All right. Hopefully, you don't get your call between now and then. AJ, do you want to start us off with picks then?
Yes, I do, Chuck. So, one thing that I totally forgot last time. So, my wife and I took a trip to Colorado to see the Royal Gorge Bridge, and on the way, we finally started listening to some of the Brandon Sanderson secret project books that we've had now for, I guess, about 2 years, but have not like taken the opportunity to enjoy listening to them. So on the trip we did, and we listened to Yumi and the Nightmare Painter and Sunlit Man, and she, I think, had already listened to Tress, and I was in the last few chapters of The Frugal Wizard's Guide to Medieval England. And Yumi and the Nightmare Painter is just an amazing story. I think that it is one of Brandon Sanderson's best works. It very much has an anime feel to it. He says that it was inspired by Final Fantasy X and a manga, and then just, you know, some of his own thoughts while sitting on the bus or in the park or something. But it is it's a world in which there are nightmare painters, and nightmare painters go out at night, and they're basically like cops. Like, not like cops, they're like citizen, what did you call that back in the 90s with the signs up in the neighborhood watch? They're like neighborhood watch, like paid neighborhood watch, except that they are watching out for nightmares, which are creatures that come out at night and become manifest from people's dreams. So very, very much in that vein of, you know, like Spirited Away or something that seems like a Studio Ghibli type of story. And, you know, that in of itself may not appeal to you, but I'd almost rather just give someone the book and say, here, read this or listen to this, than try to describe it, but I'll try to describe it anyway. So there's the Nightmare Painters, and then there is Yumi, who I don't think that she's called a princess, but essentially she's not a princess. She's a type of royalty. And then it kind of goes into a Freaky Friday scenario. So yes, it's like Spirited Away meets Freaky Friday. That is what Yumi and the Nightmare Painter is. But there's also, I don't know. I mean, calling it that just makes it sound so not as great as it is. Because Freaky Friday is an okay movie, and Spirited Away is a very weird cartoon. But Yumi and the Nightmare Painter is just awesome. I loved it. I think it was around 12 hours long. And we listened to it on 1.5 in one setting on our trip out to the hotel. And then 2 other quick picks. The Chosen. I think that season 4 has been phenomenal. I think it's really interesting as a fairly, well, it's a non-denominational portraying of Jesus's disciples. So there's a little bit of Catholicism in there. There's a little bit of Judaism in there. There's a little bit of evangelist Christianity in there. There's a bit of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in there. There's lots of different philosophies represented. Not, I think, because the intent was to represent the different philosophies or different religions, but more because I think this person just has a really good reading of the Bible. By good reading, I mean is able to see past the 5,000 years of translations and idioms, and, you know, like to really pull out what I think was meant. And I imagine it must have made a lot of pastors and seminaries very angry to see season 4. I've heard of last, but but that's the whole thing, is it's about the Pharisees and the Sadducees and Jesus being a revolutionary. And so season 4 was great. I can't wait for season 5. They just finished filming it. But if you don't need to be a religious person to enjoy The Chosen, it is such a well-produced show. It is family friendly, with the caveat that there are scenes with violence in them. There are topics that are hard to deal with, like miscarriage. You know, there are like real life topics in the show. So it's like, I would give it a rating of PG-13 thematically, but PG in terms of like it's a good family show. And the first few episodes are hard to get into because it's not really clear where it's going. But once you get past the third or fourth episode, it's a pretty gripping show, and I'd recommend it to anybody, religious or not. And if you are religious and you watch it, you might have to just be okay with some of your beliefs being challenged or interpreted differently, but not in a bad way, not in a malicious way. Just, taking there's different beliefs represented, and I think that it's all biblical, but it may not be biblical in the way that your particular pastor or church group may have explained it before. And I don't, some people might think, well, that makes it wrong, but I think that they stick to the biblical story. It's just not yeah, I don't know how to say it on that. And the last thing, super quick, I found this came up again, Beauty and the Beat. I have a YouTube video that just couldn't be made today, but it's so amazing. It's Belle in the Hood. And it's so funny. It's yeah, that's basically how to describe it. Fun little video that's a parody of Beauty and the Beast, the morning song when it's, hello, how's your bread? Oh, I'm just reading a story, but instead it's just, oh, it's so hilarious. And it has some of the early, YouTube comedians and stuff in it, back when YouTube was a little bit more grassroots and raw, So anyway, those are my picks.
All right, Steve, what are your picks?
Oh, is AJ done? Sorry, I was taking a nap there for a second.
Good. I wanted to give you time, Steve.
You gave me plenty, trust me. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, a little article I saw about in MySpace. It's on triblive.com, and it says, MySpace celebrates its 21st birthday. Do we still need it? So I didn't even know it existed either. I haven't used it in a while. I can remember when it first came out, and from a coding standpoint, if you want to look at it from that standpoint, it was, if I remember, the big thing was it allowed you to customize like CSS. And so you had people doing whole businesses off of creating customized MySpace themes for people to have for their own profile. I know I've heard some people say that was how they really started to learn about front end styling and theming with CSS and HTML. So maybe from a security standpoint, it wasn't the best thing, but in terms of being a tool to allow people to learn how to use the web and make the web look good, it seems to have its own space in coding history. Now for the totally in we lost Jeff there. Might not know that the dad jokes are the high point of any of these podcasts. So here they are. So the other day I saw a microbiologist. He was a lot bigger than I expected. Right. And then over the weekend, I was working on my house, doing some, work around the house, and I fell off a 50-foot ladder. Fortunately, I was only on the bottom step. And then here's a thought on Disney and Pinocchio. Was reading some about him lately, probably on TMZ or something, and heard that he hasn't had much luck on dating apps. But I mean, what do you expect from a guy who's looking for a relationship with no strings attached? Those are my picks.
All right. I'm going to jump in, do my picks real fast. So the first pick is, I usually do a board game pick. Of course, you've been on before, so you probably know that. I'm going to pick a game, Challengers. It's kind of a mix of Capture the Flag and War. So you start out with your base set, you build your deck, and then you play one-on-one against somebody else that's playing, and you flip over cards until you've beat their top card, then you get the flag. I mean, that's more or less it. I mean, the deck building gets a little involved, but that's effectively the game. It'll play up to 8 people, and so you play 7 rounds, and you just rotate chairs, right? So each of you get a little schedule, right? So you're on the red, and then you're on the green, and then you're on the yellow, and then you're back to the red. And then whoever has the most points at the end of the round or at the end of the 7th round, the top two go head to head, and whoever wins. That's the game. Really, really fun game. I tried to teach it to my family last night, and I have to admit my wife was tired and didn't want to play more than 2 rounds. But let me get the board game weight for you. Here we go. Challengers. It is weighted at 1.78. So that's pretty approachable for most casual gamers. The first time you play it, it takes a little bit to kind of figure some of it out, but then after that, you're kind of good to go. A couple of other picks here real quick. I've been reading Obi Fernandez's book on AI, and I am really enjoying getting into AI. So I'm going to put a link to that in the chat, and then it'll show up as comments on Facebook, Twitch, and YouTube. But the last thing is, and I'm just going to put it out there, I am working on getting AI for JavaScript.com launched. You'll get emails from me about how to do AI in JavaScript. I'm putting together an AI summit at the end of September. And just to give you a little bit of context, it's not focused on JavaScript or Ruby or any other language per se. It is primarily focused on how do you add AI features to your apps. So we're also not getting into PyTorch or anything like that. And then I'm going to do a boot camp starting in late October, early November, and we'll go through, okay, here's how you use some of the transcription services. Here's how you use some of the services like Chat or GPT-4, or, some of the other ones that are out there. If you need a more custom model, here's how you use Llama 3 or something like that. So we're just going to go into all of that, some of the other computer vision and image generation, video generation. So we'll get into all of that in the bootcamp. And so I don't have a website for it yet, but that's coming. So if you sign up for the summit or sign up for the email list, you'll definitely get notified when that comes out. So those are my picks. Toli, what are your picks?
Yeah, so I've got 3. The first one is a hobby you might want to try if you want to get better at communication. The general umbrella is called authentic relating. And then there are a few sub communities. There's NVC, nonviolent communication, and circling, and I forgot the third one. Yeah, it's a really great group of people. You build tight bonds, you get to know yourself more. And I've noticed my ability to communicate with my coworkers really increased since I started doing it. The second one is acro yoga, or partner acrobatics. Essentially, you do acrobatics with somebody else, but it has a more smooth kind of feel to it rather than cheerleading. And it's also a really great way to get to know other people and learn more of that somatic communication. And the third thing is a resource that I've been writing. It's called the Neurodivergent Guide to the Workplace. So if you identify as neurodivergent, or if you simply want to learn some cool tricks on how to navigate the workplace better, check it out. It's on os.toli.me.
Awesome. All right. If people want to follow you online, where do they find you?
Toli.me.
One last thing. It's lcsquad.com for the LeetCode meetup if you're in New York.
You got it.
And Toli is Toli, right?
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for coming. Tell Jeff thanks for us. And we'll wrap it up. Till next time. Max out.